Hello and welcome to my studio. I am Lesley Ann Robinson of Knit Graffiti Designs. And today I'm going to share with you the super duper fun star mesh lace stitch pattern, which can be found in my top pattern, which is called Mischief Maker, which I'm wearing right now. Okay, it's very repetitive. And once you get going with it, it's fairly intuitive. So hopefully this video tutorial can help you achieve the best stitch pattern that you can. Mostly it's about the center double decrease that is used. That's kind of the key part in making this look like this kind of fishnet lace stitch pattern. Okay, there's also a little bit of a tricky part when you're knitting the top in the round, which is the bottom part. Okay, this top is knit from the bottom up in a T shape, which creates a boat neck. And I have it designed as a very wide open neck, which you can certainly modify if you want yours to be a little less wide. But when you're knitting it in the round, it's a bit different from when you're knitting it flat. Okay, so I'll go over that today in this video tutorial, and I hope you enjoy my newest pattern. And here we go. Okay, I'm ready to show you how to knit a swatch and how to work the star mesh stitch pattern that can be found in my Mischief Maker top pattern. Okay, here is the swatch that I originally knit for my top. I am using Junk Yarn Boss Sock in the colorway Pizzazz. This is the same colorway that I used for my top pattern. So you can tell I was inspired by the character Pizzazz from Gem and the Holograms, who was in the band The Misfits. So if you can tell, this is kind of the color of her amazing hair. So here you can see the star mesh stitch pattern. Don't pay attention to this part up here because I think I lost where I was in the pattern. But you can see that I'm going to stretch it out a little bit so you can see. It looks like a complicated stitch pattern, but really all you're doing is you're working yarn overs, okay, which create a new stitch. It's an increased stitch, but it's also creating a hole in the fabric like this. And then you're creating a center double decrease, okay, and you're going to be alternating when you work this center double decrease. Okay, so like if you worked the center double decrease on this line of knit stitches in the row previously, you will just knit the stitch where that center double decrease was. So this kind of creates these really cool lines going up the fabric. Okay, so let's get going. If you're following along with the actual pattern, okay, I've provided a swatch on page 4, okay, of swatch pattern. So this can kind of help you understand how many stitches you'll need to cast on. We're going to be knitting our swatch flat, okay, because the top of the top half of the top is knit flat, and that's the most important part for you to achieve gauge. Okay, so in the swatch pattern, I recommend casting on 31 stitches. You can that's going to get you about 4 inches. Obviously, I cast on a lot more. My swatch was a little bit, I think I cast on over 50 stitches. So my swatch was very big. You don't have to knit one that large, but I do recommend at least a 4x4 size, like a 4" by 4" or a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter swatch, if not larger, just to give you the most accurate gauge reading. Okay, so most gauges, this includes mine, are measured over a 4" or 4 centimeter kind of a square. Okay, so we're going to be casting on 31 stitches. I'm going to cast on fewer just because I want to be able to show you the stitch pattern. So I'm going to show you how to work the twisted German cast on. I'm not going to show this in super depth. If you want to see a more in-depth video tutorial of this cast on, you can follow the link to my video tutorial in my YouTube channel. Okay, so for the long tail, for the twisted German cast on method, you want to start with a tail similar to the long tail. Okay, and honestly, it's a swatch. If you wanted to just use any cast on that you're comfortable with, that's totally fine. So I'm going to measure out a long tail because I'm only doing 31 stitches. Doesn't need to be super long. I'm going to put the tail end over my thumb, the end that's attached to my working yarn, which is here, over my finger. I'm going to grab the yarn tails with the rest of my fingers and kind of pull this tight. This is going to be my first stitch. Okay. I also have my knitting needles ready, and I have a stitch marker because I want to show you how to work it. When you get to it in the round, it becomes a little bit trickier. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So I'm using the size 5 needles. I'm using circular needles because you will be knitting in the round. Once you knit flat, you don't have to have circular needles, but I just prefer them. So I'm going to take my needle. Okay, I've got this tightrope. I'm going to press my needle on the tightrope, give it a twist so that the top yarn is going away from me. Okay, now I'm going to face my palm up and give a little bit of slack with the yarn. And I'm going to, this is my first stitch, I'm going to hold it on my needle with my index finger. I'm going to take my needle and go underneath both loops that my thumb is holding. Okay, bring it down through the top and pull that back leg towards me. Reach around, grab the yarn with my index finger, pull it through that window. There's my new stitch. Pull it tight. So that first little twist that we did, we're only going to do that once. So I'm just going to continue casting on my stitches. Again, if you want to see a more in-depth cast on tutorial, you can feel free to go to my other video where I do it a bit more slowly. And I'm going to continue casting on these stitches off screen, and I will meet you back. Okay, I actually decided to just cast on 19 stitches, okay? So just so I can get through my swatch a little bit quicker as I'm showing you. This will probably grow a little bit, but I do recommend you casting on at least 31 stitches for your swatch. Okay, so I'm going to turn my work, and for my little setup row, I'm just going to knit. I'm going to knit the first stitch. So this is just to kind of stretch out my stitches a little bit. And then I'm going to purl to the last stitch. Okay. So this is working on the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm just doing this so that my stitches are stretched out on my needles. Sometimes the cast on edge can be a little tight and tricky. So when you're working the top and you're going to be starting it in the round, you are going to be working a few rounds of stockinette before you begin the lace. Okay, when I come to my last stitch, I am just going to slip it purlwise onto my needle and keep my working yarn in the front. Now I can turn. This is going to be the right side of my work. If it's helpful for you to clip a removable stitch marker on the main side of your work, that can be really helpful just to be able to tell which is your right side, which is your wrong side, I mean, they do look pretty different. Once you get pretty familiar with the stitch pattern, you can hopefully tell what is the right side, what is the wrong side of the fabric. But especially if you're learning a new stitch pattern, it can be really helpful to clip that removable marker just to help you remember which is your right side and which is your wrong side. Okay, so for row 1, again, we're knitting this flat. Okay, I have both written instructions and a chart, so use whichever you prefer. I myself am a chart knitter, so that's what I prefer to work from, but just follow with whichever you prefer to work with. So you can tell in the written instructions, the stitch pattern repeat has been bolded, okay? And if you're following along with the chart, the stitch pattern repeat is between the pink lines, okay? So I'm going to knit my first stitch, and then I'm going to begin my stitch pattern repeat, okay? I'm going to knit one again. Then I'm going to work a yarn over, which if you're an English style knitter like me, I'll show both ways. You just want to bring your yarn between the needles to the front of your work, okay? And for me, I just leave it there because when I work the next center double decrease, it will automatically create the new stitch. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be bringing your yarn across the needle to the back, creating a new stitch. Okay, this will also create a hole in your fabric, which is decorative and part of the look of the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to be working the slip 2 knit 1 PSSO, which stands for, okay, I'm going to be working it into these 3 stitches, okay, and we're going to be going from 3 stitches down to 1, and it's a center double decrease, which means that once we're finished, the center stitch is going to be looking like a knit stitch going all the way up the fabric. Okay, so what's important about this abbreviation, be sure to always read the abbreviations and the definitions before you work the decrease, because this one's actually very important. You need to slip the first 2 stitches knitwise together at the same time. So I'm going to place my needle in as if to knit. Okay, so pretend like you're going to be knitting 2 together, except you're going to slip those stitches off your needle. Okay, so basically what you want to do is you want to twist them, and by doing this, this is the center stitch, okay? And then I'm going to knit one, so I'm going to knit this stitch, so you can see when I'm knitting that stitch, I'm creating that yarn over, okay? So this is the yarn over that I just worked, okay? That's adding a stitch, then we're going to decrease 2 stitches. So I've knit that stitch. Now I'm going to pass both of these stitches over. So I'm going to place my needle in both of these stitches, pass them over that stitch that I knit. Okay, so this is the most important part in getting the look of that star mesh rib, that you really need to slip the first 2 stitches together knitwise at the same time. And that's going to create that beautiful line going up your fabric. Now, once we've finished that decrease, we're going to work another yarn over. Okay, so bring your yarn, okay, your yarn is in the back, bring it between your needles to the front, and then you're going to start your repeat all over again. You're going to knit one. So kind of think about it like every other stitch is going to be, you're going to have a yarn over every other stitch, okay? So if you kind of stretch your work out, you can kind of see the hole that it's creating. And then every other stitch, you're going to have either your center double decrease or a plain knit stitch, okay? So now I've worked a knit one. I'm going to show this in continental knitting style. I usually show it in these 2 knitting styles. I know everybody knits differently, but hopefully you can find, understand how to work this in your own knitting style. So I've just worked the knit one. I'm going to work a yarn over, which if you're a continental style knitter, you just want to work a yarn over like this. Because what you want to do is you want your yarn to come to the front, and then you want it to go across the needle back to the back of the work, creating a new stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to work that slip 2, knit 1, PSSO. I'm going to work that again into these 3 stitches. I'm going to put my needle in as if to knit both of those stitches together, but I'm just going to slip them off my needle, twisting them in the process. And I'm going to knit 1. I unplied my yarn there a little bit. Okay, I knit 1, and now I'm going to pass these over that knit stitch, and then I'm going to work a yarn over one more time, start my repeat over again. Okay, so while I was learning this stitch pattern, I definitely went pretty slow just to make sure that I did it correctly. So I would kind of, every time I worked a repeat, I would go back and make sure I had yarn over, decrease, yarn over, knit, yarn over, decrease, yarn over, knit, and I'm going to work a yarn over again. I'm going to work the decrease into these 3 stitches, slip 2 knitwise together, knit 1, pass these 2 over together, yarn over, and you're basically repeating this till the last 2 stitches. So now I'm going to start it again, knit 1, yarn over. Okay, I'm going to slip 2 knitwise, knit 1, pass the 2 over, yarn over, and then I'm going to end with a knit 1, and then I'm going to bring my working yarn to the front and slip the last stitch purlwise onto my needle. Okay, so when you're working this in the round, you're going to be obviously working the stitch pattern around, and you're going to be on like the even rounds, you'll be knitting those stitches. Okay, so we just finished row 1, and now we're going to turn to work row 2, which is going to be on the wrong side of our work. And again, when you're working this flat, we're going to just be purling across the row, okay? So except I'm going to knit my first stitch. Make sure you're working with your working yarn, not your tail from your cast on. I'm going to be knitting the first stitch, okay? So this is going to keep a nice selvage going up your work. And this is going to be important on the edge of your sleeve once you're done with your top. So I'm going to knit the edge stitch, and then I'm just going to purl to the last stitch. Okay, so this is a yarn over here. That's what a yarn over looks like. So you just want to purl into the front leg of that just as you would a traditional knit stitch. Here's the decrease stitch. Here's another yarn over. So if you ever come to a spot that should have a yarn over, but like let's say it just fell off your needle, well, you can just kind of shimmy that yarn over back up on your needle, and no one will even know that that ever happened. So I'm just going to continue purling across the row. So this will keep everything looking like knit stitches on the right side of the fabric. Okay, so again, when you're knitting this in the round, you will be knitting the even rounds, not purling, because when you're knitting in the round, you're always working on the right side of the fabric. Okay, so now I'm going to just slip the last stitch with my working yarn in front. Again, this will keep a very nice selvage going up the edge of your work. So now you can kind of see the stitch pattern is starting to form, but you don't really see those crossbars yet. Okay, those are going to happen when you alternate where the decrease is. So now we're going to work row 3. Okay, so row 3 is worked almost identically to row 1, okay, except that the stitch pattern repeat is going to be shifted. Okay, so where you worked the knit 1 from the previous row, okay, so when you look at your work, you can kind of see where you worked the decrease. As it gets, as it gets longer, it will be a little easier to tell. So this right here, this is the knit stitch that I worked. Here is the decrease that I worked. Okay, so where the knit stitch was, this is where we're going to be working the decrease on this row. So I'm going to work a little bit of an edge. So I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to work just knit 2 together. So we're basically pretending like this is 1/2 of the center double decrease. Then I'm going to work a yarn over, and now I'm going to start my stitch pattern repeat. So again, here's the decrease that was worked in the previous row 1. So we're just going to knit that stitch. And I'll work a yarn over. Okay, so here's where I worked the knit 1 in the row 1. So this is where I want to work my decrease. I'm going to work the slip 2 together, knitwise, knit 1, again, creating my yarn over there, pass the 2 over together. Give it a tug. Work yarn over again. And now I'm going to start my repeat over. I'm going to knit 1, yarn over. Again, here's where you can see I just worked a knit 1 in row 1. I'm going to work slip 2 together knitwise, knit 1, pass the 2 stitches over together, yarn over, and then we start over again, knit 1, yarn over, slip 2 together knitwise, knit 1, pass the 2 over together. Then we're going to end with yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, and then we're going to work a slip, slip, knit, which I slip the 2 stitches separately knitwise, put my left hand needle through the fronts of the loops, knit them together through the back loops. Okay, and then I'm going to bring my working yarn to the front, slip that stitch purlwise. Okay, so the reason we worked knit 2 together on the right edge and a slip slip knit on the left edge was because in order to keep our stitch pattern even, we just needed to kind of work half of the decrease on each side. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to turn and work row 4, which is going to be exactly the same as row 2. I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to purl to the last stitch. So again, you'll get to your yarn over. Now it's going to start looking like the actual stitch pattern where the yarn overs are going to kind of cross, almost make like a little Donkey Kong ladder, like Donkey Kong ladder going up, where it goes like doot, 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 doot. Everything's a video game reference for me. So that is your stitch pattern repeat. It's just 4 rows or 4 rounds, depending on whether you're knitting it in the round or knitting it flat. But I do highly recommend knitting a swatch for two very big reasons. Okay, I'm a huge swatch advocate. The first reason is to make sure that when you knit your top, it will fit the way that you want it to, because your gauge might be completely different from mine. So try out a swatch with the size needle that I used, which is a US 5 or 3.75 millimeter, which you can see right here on my needle. Okay, if your gauge is a lot different from mine, you can either go up or down a needle size depending on how many stitches you're getting per inch. I'm going to be honest with you, the row or round gauge doesn't matter as much because you're going to be knitting to a certain length. So if your row or round gauge is a little bit off, it's more important that your stitch gauge is right, exactly the same. Okay, so if when you're measuring your gauge, okay, you're going to be measuring kind of consider this as like, this is 1 stitch, this is 2 stitches, 3. So you would kind of count across like that when you're counting your gauge. Hopefully that makes sense. And then for row gauge, you'll just count what looks like the knit stitches up like 1 column. Okay, so let's pretend that I'm knitting this in the round. Okay, so round 1 and round 2 will be worked similarly to what we did. You won't have the edge stitches. You'll be just working continuously in the round. But once you get to round 3, every time you work round 3 in the round, obviously, you will need to basically borrow the last stitch from the previous round. Okay, so I'm going to set up my needles as if I am working this in the round. So I'm just going to slip this over. So here's where I would be working my first decrease in the round. So I'm going to pretend like this is my beginning of round, okay? Okay, so I'm going to put a stitch marker here. We're going to pretend like that's the beginning of the round. So hopefully you can imagine with me. Let's open up our imagination minds. Pretend like I'm working in the round. So I'm just gonna work over to that stitch. So pretend like la 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 la. This is the last stitch in the round. Okay, so I'm just knitting over to it, pretending like that's the end of my round. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to temporarily remove my stitch marker. Okay, so if you're following along with me, I do have an extensive notes on this in the written instructions as well as the chart. Okay, so basically we're gonna work the decrease in these 2 stitches. Okay, so we need to borrow this stitch from the previous round. So I'm going to slip this stitch over to my left hand needle purlwise. Okay, I'm going to work the decrease as usual. So I'm going to slip 2 knitwise. I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to pass these 2 over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip this final stitch. So here's my decrease that I just worked. I'm going to slip that to my left hand needle. I'm going to return my beginning of round marker. Okay, these are my really fun little lightning bolt markers from Katrinkles. And then I'm going to place my final decreased stitch on my right hand needle. Okay, so this ensures that our beginning of round marker is going to stay in the same place. Okay, it's not going to shift around if you work it like this. And the end of round, once you get to the last stitch, you'll end with a yarn over. So you're basically replacing that stitch that you borrowed. So hopefully that makes sense. This will ensure that all of your knit stitches and your decreased stitches are all lined up while you're working in the round. So hopefully that makes sense. And please let me know if you have any questions. You can leave a comment below with a question. You can feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email address on the screen. And if you are interested in making this pattern, I have links to both Ravelry and knitgraffiti.com where you can purchase the pattern for yourself. And if you're watching this on Halloween, happy Halloween. I hope you're having an amazing time. Whatever you're doing, if you're going to be partying or if you're just going to be knitting, hopefully you have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you watching my channel. If you are not already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you like video tutorials. I always share video tutorials for new patterns. And thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.